The Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and your local cable provider presents Cable Reports. Join us now as Cable Reports brings you up to date on current issues facing the Commonwealth through discussions with your local legislators and other policymakers from across Virginia.
From the General Assembly and the City of Richmond, I'm Woody Evans for Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and Cox Communications, connecting Virginians to their government. We're pleased to have Delegate Steve Heretick with us today. Good to see you, Steve.
Woody, great to be back.
We were just talking about how fast and furious this short session has been. We just crossed the Rubicon, so to speak, in terms of crossover day. How are things going from your perspective?
Well, I don't know why anybody calls it the short session, because to us it feels like it's the same amount of work, just less days to do it. But I can tell you that, the organization that we see in the House and the Senate, to help move bills along, it really is an amazing thing to watch. We were in session Monday, the day before crossover, for about 10 hours. Crossover day itself, we were only in for about 3.5. So today is the first day after crossover as we're filming this. So now we're beginning to see the Senate bills coming in this afternoon, and we're off to the races again.
It appears that there have been many more visitors this year than in the past. What's going on in terms of that?
I think probably just nationally, we're getting a lot more interest in government. We've seen a lot more school groups, a lot more civic groups coming up and asking questions about what we're doing. It's been kind of fun, actually. Just this morning, I think I had 4 different groups in within very short time frames, and I think people are taking a more active role in participating with government. They want to know why we're doing what we're doing. They're asking questions or challenging us. I think it's a good thing.
So what's a typical day like for you, if there is a typical day? I know you start very early in the mornings because there are subcommittee meetings.
Oh yeah, we have committees, Woody, coming in as early as 7 a.m. And you have to be on your feet ready to present a bill at 7. And the Capitol is packed at that hour, believe it or not. It starts early. We have committees usually in the morning. We have office meetings throughout the day. I get to take time off and do things like this. And then, of course, we're in session beginning at noon every day. And sometimes the sessions are fairly short. I think today is going to be fairly brief. But other days, like I mentioned a moment ago, we have sessions going 10 hours, which takes out the most of the day. And then, just when you think it's safe to go back in the water, we have committees after. So depending on what your committee assignments are, you can be here from 7 a.m. until 9 p.m. every day quite easily.
Now, there's been a move towards more transparency in the General Assembly.
Yes.
People can now access on demand after a floor debate, for example. So that's a great move. I think, however, that doesn't apply to committee and subcommittee meetings.
Well, not yet, but I can tell you that there are certain public interest groups out there who are recording even subcommittee hearings now because they want to see how people are voting and how they're commenting on bills. I know that Delegate Levine in the House has formed what he's calling the Transparency Caucus, which I've been participating in. And the idea basically is we want to make sure that every time we cast a vote, whether it's on the floor officially or even a subcommittee unofficially, that people know how we're thinking, how we're voting, and what kind of leadership we're providing. And I can tell you that I think to some of the older members who are not used to that, it's a bit of a challenge. But I think to those of us who are, millennials, or I'm just a little older than that, nevertheless, but to those of us who live in an age of Facebook, we're used to having our comments and having our thoughts, pretty quickly projected to the public. And to me, I think it's a very healthy thing.
So how's the budget coming along from your perspective?
Well, we had budget briefings yesterday with Chairman Chris Jones, who is the chair of House Appropriations. Obviously the budget is always challenging. Being sort of an off year, what we're trying to do right now is we're trying to, fill in those holes that, exist in the budget that nobody saw coming. And obviously with the fiscal forecast, not quite hitting
Right.
its marks this year, the state doesn't have quite as much money as we were projected to get in tax revenue. So we're playing nip and tuck as best we can with the resources we have. I know there was a lot of concern coming into the budget this year that, education would be taking a major hit, that law enforcement would be taking a major hit. And, it's those core services, I think, that we really have to protect. And I really have to applaud, my colleagues on appropriations and Chairman Jones to really start filling those gaps. You're seeing, raises for state police. We're seeing money coming back into the education budget for teacher raises. We're seeing state employee raises coming back onto the table. So we're not quite sure yet what the Senate budget's going to look like. And ultimately, at the end, it all has to come together and everybody has to agree. But right now, I'm a little more optimistic about the budget going forward than I might have been even a month ago.
So apparently, state police, for example, were taking their skills to other states, to even local jurisdictions within the Commonwealth because of the pay problems.
Well, and starting pay in the state police, I don't think most people recognize, is under $40,000 a year.
Under $40,000 a year.
And that, I think, when I found out, was a little appalling to me. I mean, I think the state troopers, we see them everywhere, we take them for granted, but that is hard training. Those are some of the most elite law enforcement officers we have in the Commonwealth. And obviously nobody does it for money, you do it for service. But nevertheless, some of those guys were making close to the poverty line. And as a result, they were taking, higher paying jobs in other law enforcement agencies and federal agencies. We were losing state police troopers, well, entirely too much. I think at one point this past year we heard that there was like a 240 trooper gap in the force, and we have to take rapid measures to deal with that because, as we all know, especially on the highways throughout Virginia, that's our primary means of law enforcement. At the same time, we're putting some additional money into supporting sheriffs and police departments. Right. We're trying to keep those officers funded up. I think it's a labor of love for a lot of people, but they shouldn't. Their families shouldn't have to go in need because they do what they do.
And of course, you mentioned raises for teachers. Now, at one time, the best guess, so to speak, was going to be a 1.5% bonus for them.
Right, and I think right now we're looking, fingers crossed, at someplace between 2 and 3%. So it might actually be a little better, but nevertheless, there's still a lot of numbers in the air right now. So I don't want to whip out my crystal ball a little too early, but I can tell you that I think appropriations done an amazing job of pulling together the resources we have and making the cuts where we can afford them and putting the money back into the programs and supporting the efforts that we have to have.
Talk to us about your district, especially how the economy has fared since you've been here in the House of Delegates.
Well, the 79th House District, which is mine, comprises portions of Norfolk and Portsmouth. And I'm very proud to say that we have a big military component. I have the Naval Operating Base in Norfolk, the big Navy base. I have Old Dominion University. We have all the major ports in Virginia except for Newport News. So this is a district that is steeped not only in military tradition, but in emerging economic viability for the Commonwealth. As we've seen over the past couple of years, the ports particularly are growing in size, growing in revenue. We're about to see a doubling of size for what we call the Virginia International Gateway Port in Portsmouth, my hometown. And as we see that is soon going to be, I think, probably the second largest port in the eastern seaboard. Now, when you think about that, we think about New York as being the biggest. We think about Baltimore. We think about Savannah, Charleston. We're about to be positioned uniquely in the center of the eastern seaboard as one of the largest ports in the country. And that's an amazing thing to us. And it's a huge revenue generator for the Commonwealth. And by the way, it helps us all because the revenue that we realize from the ports comes into the general fund. It keeps our tax rates low. It lets us continue to work with education and to fund those types of projects. So it really does have an outflow throughout the entire Commonwealth and not just Hampton Roads. I think what we also know at the same time is there's always this uncertainty, especially surrounding sequestration and the defense industry. Those of us who live with the military as our neighbors in Norfolk and in Portsmouth and in Virginia Beach, every time the federal government talks about sequestration and what comes with that, we get nervous because, let's face it, well over 20% of our regional economy comes directly from the defense industry. And I've seen numbers which are much higher than that. So if we lose a carrier task force, if we lose an air wing, if we have a change of command that goes to another state, that really affects us dramatically and quickly.
Now, there's been talk of a new Virginia economy. What's happening in your district in that regard?
Well, again, we're focusing a lot on ports and developing the transportation around the ports to facilitate that additional trade. I mean, I think it should be exciting to people that we get a huge amount of international trade right through the ports of Hampton Roads right now. People don't recognize that we have one of the best inland ports in the world sitting right where we are. And I know it sounds maybe a little boring to people, but our channel depth is naturally a little bit deeper than it is in New York and some of the other port facilities. And as a result, you know, we kind of attract the size of shipping. They're called post-Panamax. They're massive, massive ships.
That's because the Panama Canal has been widened.
Exactly. And as the Panama Canal is widened, the ships get bigger. They can carry, you know, more freight with, you know, less shipping. So it's more economical for ship handlers to send their materials to us. So what we're seeing is we're seeing a lot larger ships. We're seeing a lot more of them. And as a result, we have a lot more trade coming in and out of the ports of Hampton Roads. So it's a really dynamic time for us to be there right now.
Now, about a year ago, there was an initiative entitled Go Virginia.
Yes.
Business people brought that idea, as I recall, to the General Assembly. Part of it relates to encouraging local governments to cooperate on a regional basis. From your perspective, how is that proceeding?
You know, I think it's really, well, I think the problem is we have so many ideas of ways to work with each other. It's kind of hard to pin them down and operationalize them, okay? So Go Virginia, I think, is a great way of building communities like we have in Hampton Roads that traditionally think of themselves as different. You know, if, you know, I am Norfolk or I am Portsmouth or I am Chesapeake, and forcing us, incentivizing us to pull together and to work together in ways that really carry the economy forward. And I think that's really what we need to see in Hampton Roads a great deal more. We hear a lot about regionalism in Hampton Roads, as we see, for example, in North Carolina in the Research Triangle, Raleigh-Durham. We see in Charlotte, North Carolina, for example, that's pulled in a lot of localities together in one cohesive whole. If we do that in Hampton Roads, as a lot of our business leaders have suggested, we become one of the largest markets not only in the state, but in the United States. And it makes us a little bit more competitive in terms of attracting transportation funding and attracting major corporate, you know, sponsorships, and really bringing a lot of business and opportunity to the region that we as individual localities would never realize on our own. And things like Go Virginia, W. Wynn, who was a big proponent of that from Norfolk, you know, those are the visionaries that are really bringing us together and really helping us to realize what we can be, not as individual localities, but collectively as a region. And I got to tell you, I think exciting things are coming from it.
You must have observed some of this cutthroat competition at the local level, I take it, when you were a member of the Portsmouth City Council.
Oh, well, yeah. Listen, every city council, you know, is trying to do the best thing, the right thing for its own folks, okay? And I was no different. But you know, when you rise above a city council level and you stop sort of thinking that your world ends at the border of your city, and you start looking more collectively and more regionally, you do see the world a little bit differently. You know, when I was representing Portsmouth, we had 100,000 people. We had, of course, a lot of urban challenges. We had an education system that certainly had taken some knocks over the years. But you know, when you step above that and you begin to look at, you know, a regional collective, that is really where you begin to see the potential that Hampton Roads has. We have 1.8 million people. Think about that for a minute.
1.8 million.
Much larger than Richmond, much larger than pretty much anywhere in the state except for Northern Virginia. If we could collectivize and work together in Hampton Roads, and most of us here are trying to do just that in the Hampton Roads Caucus, we can begin to realize a lot of things that, like I said earlier, individually as communities, we would never be able to achieve on our own. I think collectively we are a lot stronger and a lot better.
Now, you mentioned earlier veterans who are neighbors, friends. You even have colleagues here in the General Assembly.
Absolutely.
What are we doing for veterans?
You know, I think the Governor McAuliffe's, you know, Bureau of Veterans Affairs really has done a lot of things to help augment the Federal Veterans Administration and to bring those services home and to make them a lot more directly accessible to veterans on our streets. You know, we see a lot more employment programs. We see a lot of coordination through the state with the federal VA. And you know, it's really encouraging, I think, to a lot of the vets who have retired not only in Hampton Roads but throughout Virginia, to see that in addition to the benefits they get from the federal government, that there is a state contingent as well. And I think getting Admiral John Harvey, who was the former four-star admiral in charge of the Navy Fleet Forces Command, a major global command, leading that agency, I think it tells everybody that the governor's administration and Virginia, we in the Commonwealth are very serious about our vets. We want to keep them close to home, and when we honor and respect their service.
And I believe there's a new service center that's being established in Hampton Roads and in Northern Virginia.
There are. I mean, again, we're trying to expand and localize the services. So instead of having to drive, 40 or 50 miles to get to a service center, we want to make it as close to home as we possibly can. And putting one in Virginia Beach, literally in the region's backyard, is a great way to start. We have a lot of vets who've retired in the Hampton Roads areas, particularly in Virginia Beach. So we want to make it as convenient for them as possible without having to go across water or pay those cursed tolls.
And you mentioned employment opportunities for veterans. The Virginia Values Veterans Program has had a lot to do with that.
Absolutely, and it's growing every day, and that's what we're excited about. Once these programs get started and up and running, and especially since most of them are staffed by former veterans themselves, they really take, those services to a new level. And I think we can all be very, very proud of what the administration has done with that.
You mentioned the dreaded word tolls.
Oh, God, yes.
I know you have some legislation dealing with that. Talk to us about the nature of that legislation.
Well, Woody, as you know, I mean, the Hampton Roads tolling at the Midtown and Downtown Tunnel have done really catastrophic things to the region, particularly to the city of Portsmouth. But what we're seeing now as the tolls continue to increase is we're seeing a lot less traffic back and forth across the river. We're seeing a lot of differences now, essentially walls being built up between our localities, and that's exactly the opposite of what we need to develop as Hampton Roads. What I'm trying to do, and some of the other members of the Assembly as well, is trying to find ways not only to address the financial burden of tolls, but to try to make them a little less onerous on those of us who have to go through those tunnels every day. One of the big problems we've had, I've had a lot of reports in my district office in Portsmouth for people who are, they might not have an easy pass or a transponder. They might only go through a tunnel just a couple of times, and they get these whopping toll bills in the mail months later, $20, $30, $40 for just a one or two tunnel uses. And by the way, now they can't renew their license plates if the tolls aren't paid. And if you think about the people that use tunnels every day to go to work, to go to the hospital, to go to school, students at ODU, for example, that builds up pretty quickly. And I think that, everybody has to pay their fair share. There's no question about that. But some of the administrative fees and some of the penalties that apply really do take people down. And so some of the bills I was able to put in this year, unfortunately they didn't survive very long, but we're working with that, are to help identify, things that we can do as the Assembly to help minimize that impact on people. And I would just like to take a quick shout out to, again, Appropriations Chair Chris Jones, who in the House budget amendments has put in a request that all toll collectors in Virginia have to report to us, the General Assembly, every year, not only about the amount of tolls they've collected, but about the administrative fees and the penalties they've collected as well, so that we as the Assembly can begin to look objectively and comprehensively at the impact that these tolls are taking on our folks. I can tell you, Woody, it's a big, big, big issue in Portsmouth and Norfolk. And as these tolls continue to rise every year, it's only going to get worse. So we have to do something.
You have a myriad of bridges and tunnels. There are sea level issues there. I know the Navy at one time complained about their transportation needs. It's not only a transportation issue, but to a large extent, it could result in a national security issue.
Well, I think it will. And, as I tell some of my colleagues that, may be a little more skeptical about, sea level rise and those types of issues, when the Navy takes it seriously, we have to take it seriously. And, part of that is there's an effort in the Assembly now to create what's known as a Chief Resiliency Officer in the Commonwealth, basically a cabinet level position, for a dedicated staff to take a good hard look at really what's going on and what we can do about it. I think it's encouraging that Old Dominion University has taken the lead for all of our educational systems in the state in helping to identify what's going on with sea level rise. I know that ODU, in connection with the Virginia Institute of Marine Science, is really taking a scientific, comprehensive look at what's happening and where we're going. But I think this is an issue that we have to take very, very seriously, not only because as water continues to rise, it affects our quality of life, but fairly soon it's going to begin to affect our economy in ways that we may not be able to recover from if we're not ahead of that issue and we're not taking preemptive action to deal with it.
There are a couple of resolutions that you introduced honoring a couple of individuals. You want to talk about them?
Well, we lost two important leaders for Hampton Roads this year. One is my former colleague on the Portsmouth City Council, Charles Whitehurst. You know, Charles was on the Portsmouth City Council for almost 20 years. He was the city treasurer, retired officer in the Marine Corps, just a community fixture in many, many ways. And I wanted to offer a memorial resolution commemorating his life and service. And I also wanted to offer a commemorating resolution to honor the life and service of my predecessor, Delegate Johnny Juenu, who also passed quite suddenly last year. Because, I mean, he gave almost 40 years of service to the General Assembly, both in the House and the Senate. And I can tell you that, you know, he was one of those guys that had been here for so long. He really did leave a huge gap in his wake. And I just wanted to do my part in letting his family and the community know how deeply we respect and value that service.
Sticking to the subject of public officials, I was shocked to learn that even upon a serious conviction, a public official may not be forced to resign from office.
Who knew? I mean, I can tell you that I think I was as shocked as anyone when, you know, we began to realize that the recent conviction of the Norfolk City Treasurer, Anthony Burfoot, did not take him out of elective office. And as we record this, he is still sitting in his office in Norfolk today, pulling down about $160,000 a year in taxpayer salary, having been convicted of multiple federal felonies. I mean, to me, and I think to most people, that's just wrong. One of the bills I put in this year, which has gone to the Senate now, would automatically suspend a local elected official from office upon conviction, and would, you know, preserve that individual's ability to recoup his or her position and salary if that conviction is overturned on appeal, as we've seen in other Virginia history. But nevertheless, nobody, at least in my humble view, and by the way, in the view of every but one member of the House that supported this bill, nobody should be drawing a public salary, sitting in a public office, exercising authority, having been convicted of a felony and basically awaiting sentencing.
I'd like to take advantage of some of your expertise as a result of being on the Science and Technology Committee, and also your unique background. I know you hold a law degree, but you also have a degree dealing with medicine, and I think you were the only non-physician ever to be president of the Virginia Board of Medicine.
Well, and Woody, I'm kind of proud of that. Governor Warner appointed me to the Virginia Board of Medicine back in 2004, and I served on the board under three governors through Governor McDonnell. And I'm proud to say that I'm still the first and only non-physician in Virginia history to serve as president of the Board of Medicine. The Board of Medicine serves, I think, a critical function in Virginia, and one that most people don't see. The Virginia Board of Medicine licenses 24 different categories now of healthcare provider, from MDs and DOs, you know, the docs who treat us, certain levels of nurse practitioners, athletic trainers. I mean, it just goes on and on and on, including, by the way, acupuncturists. We license about 40,000 Virginia healthcare practitioners a year. And I think one of the most important functions that the Board of Medicine undertakes is protecting the public by making sure that those folks who are practicing medicine or other healthcare professions out there do it safely, and taking quick and decisive action to remove those folks when they don't. It was Governor Warner who pointed out to me when he appointed me, he said, "Steve, I want good doctors practicing medicine in Virginia and bad doctors doing anything else." And I took that to heart. And one of the things that I think that we have been focusing on in the medical community lately really is the problem of opiate overprescribing. As I was telling you before we started today, that's while everybody's talking about that now, it's really been a series of focus for the Board of Medicine now for about 5 or 6 solid years. And one of the most important things that we have done with the Board of Medicine and now the healthcare industry generally is to create a database so that physicians who are overprescribing opiates, who are making those types of drugs more available to our communities, our kids, that those doctors are held to account quickly. And by the way, that at the same time, those patients who are going from doctor to doctor to doctor, trying to get those medications to support an addiction, that we identify those folks and get them the help that they need. And I think it's having a dramatic effect, some good and some not. Certainly deaths, opiate-related deaths, are way down. But at the same time, because prescription medications are harder to come by now you're seeing more use of illegal medications, including heroin. So you fix one problem, you've got another. But at least it tells me that in terms of the public policy, we're heading in a positive direction.
And of course, just so that everyone understands, this is not a problem that's unique to the Commonwealth of Virginia.
Not
this
at
is
all.
a nationwide problem.
It is a nationwide problem. And I'm proud that Virginia has really taken a leadership role nationally in beginning to address this issue. I think there are a number of other states who have really taken what we have done here in Virginia to heart, and we're seeing similar initiatives now emerging all over the United States. So I think we can be justly proud of the leadership of Governors Kane and Warner back in the day, Governor McDonnell more recently, and now Governor McAuliffe, in really being very, very aggressive in dealing with opiate overprescribing problems and taking away the ability of physicians to really put more drugs on the street than people actually need.
Got about a minute and a half left, but I wanted to give you the opportunity to talk about your legislation dealing with call centers.
One of the big problems I think we've had, especially in Hampton Roads, but I've learned more statewide, is we're losing a lot of jobs, call center jobs, to other states and now foreign countries. And one of the bills I put in this year, and I hope to reintroduce next year, is basically to help protect those jobs by requiring call centers that are going to be shutting down in Virginia and taking our jobs offshore to tell the state, so that the state will not continue to offer grants, loans, and other tax subsidies to those businesses who do that. I think we have to protect jobs in Virginia, not only in Hampton Roads, but throughout the Commonwealth. And we have to keep those, those are well-paying jobs, professional jobs. I think we have to protect them the best that we can, because part of, my or every other legislator's position here in Richmond is to keep Virginians working. We have the lowest unemployment rate now in 40 years. Think about that. But we have to stop losing the jobs we have, so I'm going to keep at it as long as I possibly can.
Great. Well, we appreciate you coming down today, Delegate Steve Heretick. Keep up the good work and good luck in the remainder of the session.
Thank you, Woody.
Thank you for watching Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and Cox Communications. Until next time, I'm Woody Evans.
Mm-hmm.